The crowd presses in from all sides, a sea of restless bodies and whispered fears. But one figure moves like a ghost among them, a woman, her hands trembling, eyes downcast, heart pounding in a cage of desperation. For 12 years, she has carried a secret so heavy it has shaped her world. A bleeding no one can see, but that everyone can sense. A loneliness sharper than any blade. She moves forward not with hope of being noticed, but with the urgent need to remain invisible. The stench of sweat and dust mingles in the air, thick and suffocating, as her fingers brush against the coarse fabric of cloaks and tunics, each touch a reminder of how far she has fallen from life. Yet here she is, risking everything in a crowd of thousands. She does not cry out. She does not reach for salvation boldly. She wants only to touch the edge of his garment and vanish before anyone turns to see her. It is a moment suspended between fear and faith, between shame and the silent yearning for healing. You might know this feeling, the ache of praying for a breakthrough so long it has worn down your voice, the quiet pleadings that go unheard even by yourself. And by the end of this, you will know why what Jesus did next refuses to let her fade into the shadows, and why it changes the way you bring your own prayers before God. If you are someone who keeps hoping God will meet you without forcing you to lay bare your wounds, stay here a little longer. The earth beneath her feet is hot, the dust rising in golden swirls as the crowd shifts with murmurs and shoves. But she parts through them like a thread pulled tight in a tapestry. Every step is a gamble to remain unseen in the throng. The air is a mixture of sweat, dust, and the faint scent of olive oil from nearby merchants, clinging to the rough edges of her clothes. Her heart is a drumbeat, repeating the years of silence and rejection, years spent as an outcast, not just by people, but by God's own laws. In ancient Judea, her condition rendered her ritually unclean, untouchable, her body a source of pollution, her presence a risk to others. The horror was not only physical but social. Barred from the temple courts, locked out of the synagogue, isolated even from her husband's embrace. This woman wears her suffering like a second skin, ache layered upon ache, invisibility upon invisibility. She has spent all she had on doctors who could do no more than bleed her dry. Her nights have been haunted by the shadows of loss of community, of dignity, of faith itself. She does not expect a miracle here, only a chance to touch hope without being seen. Jesus' voice is a distant echo, a beacon unwittingly lighting a path through the dark. But something shifts beneath the surface. The invisible thread of her faith pulls at the hem of his garment, not because she doubts his power, but because she doubts her welcome. What happens next will dismantle that doubt forever. The word used for this garment's edge is kraspedon, a simple tassel, but charged with covenantal meaning, a visible sign of God's promises carried for centuries. You will see how this small detail holds the key to her healing, and why Jesus refuses to let her hide away in silence. The journey she begins here is not just about healing blood, but about reclaiming identity, breaking through shame, and rewriting what it means to come before God with all that we carry hidden. This is for the ones who walk into crowds unseen, praying they might just touch the divine and disappear. This is for the ones tired of silence. This is for you. 12 years is long enough for a life to become a room with the windows boarded up. Morning after morning, she would wake to the same stain, the same ache, the same knowledge that everything she touched would be marked by her presence. Leviticus 15 did not leave room for softness here. It named her condition, and then it built a wall around her. Unclean. That single word meant she could not enter the temple courts, could not be close to worship, could not move through ordinary life without turning every hand she touched into a problem. The cloth of her own garments would have felt rough against irritated skin. The air would have been heavy with the smell of dust, sweat, and old oil. Even the sound of a family eating nearby could become a punishment. It is easy to read that as law. It was also loneliness, written in public. She had lost more than health. She had lost touch. She had lost the ordinary mercy of being held without fear. If you have carried one sorrow for years, you know how time changes it. At first it is an event. Later, it is a room you live inside. Maybe you are still showing up, still answering messages, still making coffee, still getting through the day. But the thing you carry has quietly become the shape of your life. By the end of this story, you will understand why she was not merely excluded from a place. You will see what her loss did to her sense of God. And you will find out why the moment she touched him was not the moment everyone assumes it was. The Greek word translated unclean is akathartos, and in her world, it was not a private feeling, but a status that spread through touch, like smoke. The text in Mark is mercilessly plain. She had suffered under many physicians, spent all she had, and instead of improving, grew worse. Luke 8:43-44 preserves that same hard edge, and Codex Vaticanus and Codex Sinaiticus both carry the sentence without trying to soften it. That matters because this is not a story about a dramatic instant after a short struggle. It is about 12 years of unanswered effort, 12 years of remedies that failed, 12 years of hoping that this month would be the month it stopped. There are people hearing that who know exactly what that feels like. A child you cannot fix, a marriage that has gone cold, a confession that should have lifted the weight but did not, a grief that kept its place at the table. The body keeps moving, but something inside has learned to expect disappointment. And that is why her touch matters so much. She did not come to Jesus with a clean record. She came carrying the shame of a life that had been narrowed by one condition, and the promise, still waiting in the dark, was not merely that power would be available, it was that the kind of touch she believed would condemn her could become the very place where mercy met her. The sentence she could not yet hear was already waiting for her. She slipped through the crowd from behind, never raising her voice, never shouting, "Son of David, have mercy on me." The very thought of calling out loud was unthinkable, a risk not only to her safety, but to her dignity, fragile and battered after 12 years of exclusion. Three forces held her back: deep shame that tied itself to her body, to something no one spoke of aloud, something intimate and female that made her feel unclean beyond repair in a culture where honor felt like air itself. A raw fear of punishment, not just from men, but from the law, which forbade her presence in gatherings because her condition contaminated others. And a haunting theology she had absorbed, that her suffering was God's punishment for some fault, a decree that made any public appeal feel like a declaration of guilt and guaranteed rejection. She did not doubt Jesus' power. That would have been too simple. What shattered her was the question, would he accept a woman like her who had spent years unseen, unloved, and unwanted? This question is the same one that lingers in hearts today. You may know what it is to come silently, holding your pain in shadows, waiting for mercy, but terrified of exposure. The crowd around Jesus was vast, voices intertwined with dust and sweat. But she approached as if she were invisible, hoping her touch alone might be enough, daring not to be known. This moment exposes a truth about how many approach God, not with open hands, not with bold cries, but with quiet, hidden needs, afraid to name the weight they carry out loud. The Greek behind her silence is telling. The word used for shame here is a complex mix of personal guilt and public dishonor, an unbearable burden that keeps so many on the edges, praying without voice, believing without certainty. Yet Jesus' response to her breaks the script. He does not ignore her or treat her as unworthy. He waits, asks, "Who touched me?" Not to shame, but to bring her out into the light. What she needed was not just healing of her body, but healing of her place in a community, healing of her name before God. This story challenges the way many keep their prayers tucked away in silence, hoping to be seen only by God, but never to be truly known. And it promises that such hiddenness is not what Jesus desires. The one who is unclean becomes a daughter, and the invisible is invited into the fullness of relationship. Your hidden pains, your quiet prayers, your half-spoken hopes, they have weight. They deserve reckoning and recognition. Because faith is not only about what God can do, but about what He does with those He calls out of darkness, even the ones afraid to be seen. The moment her fingers brushed the edge of Jesus' garment was not a random touch, nor a desperate grasp at cloth. It was a reaching for a promise woven into the very fabric she touched. The Greek word used here, kraspedon, refers specifically to the tassel or fringe sewn onto the corners of a prayer shawl, a tzitzit, mandated by the law God gave to Moses. This was not mere decoration. It was a visible, physical symbol of covenant, of God's promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, a reminder of faithfulness and hope threaded into the daily life of every Jewish man. Imagine the rough texture of wool, the coarse threads rubbing against her fingers, the scent of sweat and dust mingling with the faint aroma of olive oil carried on the breeze through the market crowd. This tassel was a tangible sign of God's presence, clothed in obedience and memory. In Malachi 4:2, the Son of Righteousness is said to rise with healing in its wings. The Hebrew word translated as wings aligns with the same root as kraspedon. This woman, forgotten by society, chose not just a man, but what that man represented: God's covenant, the Son of Justice, the healing embodied in those prayer fringes. What she reached for was more than healing. It was restoration, inclusion, and acceptance sealed by God Himself. The impulse that followed was not an act of magic, but of faith. The Gospel writer uses the phrase dynamis exelthusa. Power went out from Him. Jesus did not decide to give away a portion of power. Rather, something left Him spontaneously, drawn by the strength of her faith, flowing naturally as if the healing had a will of its own. This subtle detail overturns common teaching. Most lessons stop at the miracle, but here lies the heart. Healing emerges not from a forced gesture, but from the channel her belief opened. Jesus is not a reservoir of spiritual energy to be siphoned off by touch. His power moves, responding to faith linked to covenant promise. If you have ever wrestled with the silence of God, or wondered if your small, hidden prayer matters more than you can see, this moment speaks to you. It offers a new way to imagine the invisible threads that connect us to the divine. The healing is not just physical, but relational and covenantal. And it beckons us to bring not just desperation, but a belief in the promises God has layered into history and scripture and our everyday lives. This is where everything changes. This is where the real story begins, and where most teachers stop too early. Jairus is already there. His house is waiting. His daughter is dying, and every second matters. That is why Jesus stopping in the middle of the road feels almost unbearable. The dust underfoot, the press of bodies, the heat rising from packed stone, all of it suddenly gives way to one question hanging in the air. Who touched me? The men around him cannot make sense of it. There is a crowd. There are elbows, shoulders, sleeves, and yet Jesus stops everything for one hidden woman who was trying to disappear. He knew who she was before she came forward. That is what makes the question so shocking. He does not ask because he lacks knowledge. He asks because silence is not the same thing as healing. He asks because a body can be restored while a soul is still crouched in shame. He asks because the law in Leviticus 15 did not just declare her unclean, it made her public life impossible. And if she leaves in secret, she will still carry that verdict home with her. The Greek of Mark 5:30 says Jesus knew the power had gone out. But the point is not distance or ignorance. The point is disclosure. He stops the road to Jairus' house so this woman will not spend the rest of her life thinking she was healed like a thief in the dark. You know what that feels like. Still showing up, but the petition feels empty. Carrying something for someone you love and unable to fix what is breaking. Wondering if God sees the crisis in your house and only notices the louder rooms. This is where the delay becomes mercy. Not because the daughter of Jairus is forgotten, but because this woman's shame is not allowed to survive the miracle. Luke 8:45 records the same interruption, and the manuscripts keep it plain in Codex Vaticanus and Codex Sinaiticus. The crowd presses, the question stands, the moment stretches. And then the real reason emerges. Jesus is not content with a private recovery that leaves her still hiding in her own skin. He wants witnesses. He wants the community to hear what happened. He wants the woman who was excluded from touch to be restored in front of the people whose fear had named her life. That is why he asks. That is why he waits. That is why he refuses to move on until her story is spoken aloud. If you are carrying a prayer so long that you have almost stopped expecting an answer, this is for you. The interruption is not always the absence of care. Sometimes it is the only way mercy refuses to be misunderstood. When Jesus stops, he is not wasting time. He is protecting the meaning of the healing. Then Jesus speaks one word, and it is the word she has not heard in 12 years. Daughter. Not woman, not sinner, not the name of the disease, daughter. In the Greek text, thugater is almost shockingly intimate here, because this is the only time in all 4 Gospels that Jesus addresses someone this way, and the sound of it matters. It lands in the middle of a crowd that had known her as risk, contamination, distance. It falls like warm light on a face that had learned to live in shadow. The air around her is still full of bodies and dust, but the world has shifted. A title she never could have claimed for herself is now spoken over her by the only voice that matters. If you have ever carried a confession you could not release, if you have ever felt that one failure, one diagnosis, one season had written your real name for you, this is not a small detail. This is the center of the story. The shame that told her she was only a problem is met by a voice that names belonging before anything else. You know that feeling when everyone knows your wound before they know your face? When the room changes because you entered it? When even God feels present for everyone else, but not for you, right now? Jesus does not begin with a lecture. He begins with kinship. The manuscripts of Mark preserve that word without hesitation, and Nestle Aland prints it plainly, because there is no reason to soften what is already astonishing. After 12 years of being managed, avoided, and quietly pushed aside, she is addressed as family. John Chrysostom in the 4th century saw how the public naming mattered, because a healed body could still be hidden behind old contempt. Jesus refused that ending. He would not let her remain an anonymous miracle at the edge of somebody else's story. He called her up into belonging. That is what his question was for. That is what the pause protected. That is what the crowd was forced to hear. She came to take what she believed she could not ask for. She left with something larger than health. She left with a name that reordered her life. Maybe you know what it is to walk into prayer like an outsider, rehearsing your need, expecting only enough mercy to survive the day. Maybe you have done something confessed and absolved and still not released. Maybe the relationship looks finished. Maybe the grief does not lift the way people said it would. This word says Jesus does not only touch the place that hurts, he speaks identity over the place that shame has occupied. So, tomorrow, when you come to God with the thing you have been hiding, do not begin by arguing for permission. Begin where he began. Let him name you before you name the wound. Let him say what you are to him before you measure what you have lost. The woman in Mark 5 did not leave as a successful petitioner. She left as someone who belonged. And belonging changes how you stand, how you ask, how you endure the silence that comes before the answer. Most of us pray the way she came to Jesus, from behind, in a whisper, hoping God will help, without asking us to name the wound. But Jesus does not want hidden healing that leaves shame untouched. He wants daughters who are known, and that changes the shape of the way you come to him tomorrow. First, stop hiding the diagnosis. Say the exact name of the thing that has been eating at you. Not a fog, not a sentence that hides the pain behind religious language. Name it. the loneliness, the fear, the diagnosis, the addiction, the grief, because what stays unnamed stays untouched. Second, stop thinking your shame disqualifies you. Her shame was not the reason she stayed away, it was the reason she reached for him. The very thing you have been treating as proof that you should keep your distance may be the reason you need to come closer. Third, wait for Jesus to stop. He may already know, but he still asks because he does not only want your healing, he wants your story to be heard in his presence. That is why he halted the road to Jairus' house. That is why he refused to let a miracle remain anonymous. If you are still showing up, but the petition feels empty, this is for you. If you have carried one sorrow so long that you can almost predict the silence before it arrives, this is for you. If the grief has not lifted the way people said it would, this is for you. If a relationship looks and feels finished, this is for you. If you have done something confessed and absolved and still not released, this is for you. Every one of those places meets the same truth. Jesus is not embarrassed by what you are hiding. He is waiting for you to let him call you daughter. So tomorrow, before you reach for the usual words, pause. Name the thing. Bring it into the light. Then listen, not for a formula, but for a voice that knows your name. Take that into the kitchen, into the car, into the room where you usually go silent. That is where this story lives. That is where it changes what you do next. We thank you that the crowd did not hide her from you, and that the word thuggeter was stronger than 12 years of shame. We admit how often we still come from behind, with careful language and half-open hands. Give us the courage to name what hurts, the humility to wait when you stop, and the trust to believe that your delay is not rejection. Call us by the name you gave her, and let that name be enough for today. Amen. Which moment stayed with you most? The hidden touch, the pause on the road to Jairus' house, or the word daughter? And if you know that empty kind of praying, which of those three shifts do you need most right now? Next time, we step into the night in Gethsemane, where Jesus knows the torches are coming and walks toward them anyway. Why would he do that, and what does it mean for the night you are living in? The crowd that once forced her to move like a shadow now parts as she stands in the open, her story no longer whispered but proclaimed. The woman who carried 12 years of shame and silence steps forward not as a secret healed in the dark, but as a daughter named and known. Jairus' daughter, who had teetered on the edge of life and death, was raised to life again, proof that Jesus came not to leave anyone in the shadow of despair. The enemies of her peace, the fear, the isolation, the relentless stigma, did not vanish quietly. They were confronted and undone in public sight, just as her healing would not be hidden. This woman's quiet reaching transformed into a bold belonging, a healing that included body and soul. After that day, she was no longer defined by the years of exclusion or the threat of further rejection. She carried the new status of family, a daughter called out in the midst of many. Maybe you know what it feels like to carry burdens unseen, to hide your wounds so deeply you forget they could ever be touched by grace. Maybe you have prayed so long that silence became the only answer you believed in. Maybe you have held grief that did not quiet as others promised, or shame that still wraps around you tightly. This story is for you, not as a distant tale, but as a mirror and a door. Jesus does not wait for you to clean yourself before coming. He does not ask for perfection before he calls you by name. He sees the weight you hide and refuses to let it remain unspoken. He steps into the crowd to find you, to stop the healing that leaves shame intact, and to say the word you needed most: daughter. Tomorrow, when you approach God, carry this truth with you. You come to a Father who desires not secret healing, but known belonging, not hidden petitions, but called and claimed identity. This changes how you stand in your silence, how you bring your pain, how you wait in the spaces where answers seem absent. It changes what your prayers become, not just cries from the shadows, but voices of a daughter recognized and loved. She came to take. He gave her a name. She came for healing. He gave her a family. She came hiding. He sent her home seen, known, and called daughter. Whatever you have been hiding for years, your shame, your doubt, your broken place, he already sees it. He is not waiting for you to be clean before you come. He is waiting to cleanse you the moment you draw near. So come as you are. Bring everything you have kept in the shadows. Let him call you daughter. If this story reached you, write the word daughter in the comments. If this is the kind of healing you have been longing for, subscribe and stay with us. The next episode brings us to Gethsemane's dark night, the moment Jesus saw the torches coming and chose to walk toward them. What does that mean for the night you might be living in? Don't miss it.